My mother dated my high school bully's father for 7 years behind my back. Now it's time for revenge. Growing up wasn't easy for me. My father died when I was 12, leaving my mother to raise me alone. We weren't poor enough to go hungry, but we definitely couldn't afford any extras. I was always the tallest kid in my class, skinny as a pole, which made me an easy target for jokes and teasing. The kids at school called me names like stick and skeleton, and while I tried to laugh it off, each comment stung. Middle school was bearable, but high school turned into a nightmare. There was this group of students, led by a girl named Rachel, who made it their mission to make my life miserable. They picked on everything: my clothes, my height, even the way I walked. One time, I was wearing pants that were too short because I'd grown taller and we couldn't afford new ones. Rachel and her friends followed me around all day, pointing and laughing. They took pictures and posted them online, making sure everyone saw them. The cafeteria became a place I dreaded. Rachel and her group would sit at the table next to mine, making loud comments about everything I ate. If I brought lunch from home, they'd mock how I packed it in reused containers. If I bought school lunch, they'd make gagging sounds and pretend my food smelled bad. Most days, I ended up eating in the library or behind the gym just to get some peace. The worst part? When I finally worked up the courage to tell my mother about the bullying, she just told me to ignore it. "We can't afford to make enemies," she'd say. "Just keep your head down and focus on your studies." She made me promise not to report anything to the school, saying she was too busy working to deal with parent meetings and complaints. Every time I brought it up, she'd shut down the conversation, telling me I needed to learn to handle my own problems. I listened to her because I thought I owed her that much. She worked long hours at the local medical center as a receptionist, and I knew how hard she tried to keep us afloat. But every day at school felt like walking into a war zone. One time, Rachel and her friends locked me in the bathroom during lunch break. I was stuck there for almost an hour until the janitor heard me calling for help. Even after that incident, my mother insisted I shouldn't say anything. PE classes were particularly awful. Rachel and her friends would accidentally hit me with balls during games or steal my clothes while I was in the shower, forcing me to wear my sweaty gym clothes for the rest of the day. They'd spread rumors about me having diseases because I was so skinny, and soon nobody wanted to be my partner in class activities. The teachers noticed something was wrong, but without any formal complaints, they couldn't do much. One teacher, Ms. Thompson, tried to help by keeping me busy with extra credit work during lunch, giving me a safe place to eat. But Rachel's group just found other times to torment me. When I graduated, I got into a college 2 states away. My father had left some money for my education, and it felt like my ticket to freedom. College was different. People were nicer, more mature. I got a part-time job at a coffee shop, made real friends, and finally started feeling like a normal person. My roommate, Sarah, became the first person who truly understood me, and we spent countless nights talking about everything and nothing. I'd visit home during holidays, but those visits got shorter and less frequent as time went on. Each time I drove past my old high school, my stomach would knot up. Even seeing people who looked like Rachel or her friends would make me nervous. I started making excuses to skip hometown visits, telling my mother I had to work or study. 4 years later, I landed a good job in the same city as my college and built a life there. I had my own apartment, a small group of close friends, and was finally starting to feel confident in my own skin. My mother and I stayed in touch through calls and texts, but I rarely went home. The memories were just too painful. Then last December, my mother called with what she said was exciting news. She wanted me to come home for Christmas because she had someone special to introduce me to. She told me she'd been seeing someone for a few months and wanted me to meet him and his kids. I was happy for her. She deserved to find love again after being alone for so long. She'd always put her love life on hold to raise me, so this seemed like her chance at happiness. I spent extra money buying thoughtful gifts, a nice watch for her boyfriend, gift cards for his kids, and a beautiful scarf for my mother. During the flight home, I imagined how nice it would be to have a bigger family, maybe even siblings. I thought about how my mother might finally be truly happy. I flew home feeling optimistic, even bought gifts for everyone. When I arrived, my mother blindfolded me, saying she wanted it to be a surprise. She led me into our living room, her voice excited as she positioned me just right. But when she removed the blindfold, I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Standing there was Rachel, my high school bully, holding hands with a younger boy who looked about 15. Their father was there too, smiling and reaching out to shake my hand. I couldn't breathe. Without saying a word, I turned around and ran upstairs to my old room, locking the door behind me. My mother followed, knocking and telling me I was being rude. When I finally let her in, the truth came out. She hadn't been dating this man for a few months. They'd been seeing each other for 7 years, since my freshman year of high school. That's why she never stood up for me against Rachel's bullying. She'd been protecting her relationship with Rachel's father the entire time. My mother tried to justify it, saying she didn't want to risk ruining a new relationship over teenage drama. She insisted Rachel was just being playful and I was too sensitive. According to her, she kept it secret because she thought I wasn't ready to accept someone new after my father's death. But I knew the real reason. She chose her happiness over my well-being. I was so angry and hurt that I called the police. Looking back, it wasn't the smartest move, but I wasn't thinking straight. The officers came, but explained that this was more of a civil matter and suggested I speak with a lawyer instead. When they left, my mother lost it. She screamed at me about being ungrateful, while her boyfriend stood there agreeing with her. The stress and emotion were too much. I hadn't eaten or drunk anything all day, and suddenly everything went black. I woke up in the emergency room, where the nurse told me I'd been unconscious for about an hour. When my mother came to see me, instead of apologizing, she doubled down. She said she stood by her decisions and that I was overreacting about a bit of teenage teasing. I checked out of the hospital that night and went to stay at a hotel. I couldn't stand being in that house anymore, not with them there. My mother didn't even try to stop me when I left. I spent the next few days in my hotel room, barely eating, just trying to process everything that had happened. Then my old friend Katie called. We hadn't talked much since high school, but she'd heard about what happened. What she told me next made everything even worse. Apparently, everyone in our small town had known about my mother and Rachel's father. Everyone except me. They worked at the medical center together, Katie explained. He was one of the senior doctors there, and people would see them together all the time. They weren't even that careful about hiding it. The only reason Rachel and her friends never teased you about it was because it involved Rachel's dad. I learned that Rachel's father had been married that whole time. He'd only left his wife a few months ago, which is why he and his son were now living with my mother. His wife had gotten a huge amount of money in the divorce settlement, and he was still sending her monthly payments. The more I found out, the angrier I got. All those years my mother told me we couldn't afford new clothes or school supplies. She was secretly getting money from this man. She'd let me believe we were struggling while she was living a double life with a rich doctor. Every time I'd come home from school crying because of Rachel's bullying, my mother was probably texting Rachel's father about their dinner plans. I called my boss and explained the situation. She was understanding and let me work remotely while I dealt with everything. Katie offered to let me stay with her instead of spending all my money on the hotel. I accepted and moved my stuff to her place the next day. After thinking it over for a few days, I decided to sue my mother. I found a lawyer who specialized in family cases and explained everything. He said we had a good case for emotional distress, especially since there were witnesses who could confirm both the bullying and my mother's relationship with Rachel's father. When my mother got the lawsuit papers, she called me right away. "What do you think you're doing?" she yelled. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Everything you've done for me." I shot back. "You mean like watching me get bullied for years and doing nothing? Or lying to me about being poor while your boyfriend gave you money? Or maybe you mean lying to me for 7 years about dating my bully's father?" She tried to tell me I was being dramatic, that what happened in high school wasn't that serious. But her voice wasn't as confident as before. I think she knew she'd messed up badly. A few days later, Rachel showed up at Katie's house. My mother had sent her to try to make peace. Rachel started with an apology for how she'd treated me in high school, saying she was young and stupid then. I told her I accepted her apology just to get her to leave, but she kept talking. "You should forgive your mom," she said. "I forgave my dad for cheating on my mom, and now we're fine." I couldn't help but laugh. "Yeah, because he's rich and pays for everything. Your mom forgave him too, right after she got that huge divorce settlement." Rachel's face turned red. "At least my dad spent money on me," she snapped. "Your mom had access to his money all through high school and never spent a penny on you." I could tell she hadn't meant to say that last part. She left quickly after that, but the damage was done. Now I had proof that my mother had been getting money from Rachel's father while I was in high school. My lawyer was very interested in that information. My mother and Rachel's father started posting on social media about how ungrateful I was and how I was trying to destroy their family. Rachel joined in too, suddenly forgetting her apology and calling me jealous and bitter. But their posts just made them look worse. People who remembered me from high school started reaching out, offering to testify about the bullying they'd witnessed. The next few weeks were exhausting. I spent my days working remotely and my evenings gathering evidence and talking to my lawyer. We found old social media posts showing Rachel's bullying, teachers who remembered how I'd changed from a happy kid to a quiet, scared teenager, and even medical records from times I'd gotten mysteriously injured at school. All while my mother was dating the bully's father and keeping quiet about it. The court date kept getting pushed back because Rachel's father hired an expensive lawyer for my mother. But that actually worked in my favor. It gave us more time to build our case. Every delay meant more people from my past came forward with their stories. My old chemistry teacher told us about the time she found me crying in her classroom after Rachel had dumped water on my clothes and claimed it was an accident. The school librarian remembered how I'd hide in the library during lunch breaks. Even the janitor who'd rescued me from the locked bathroom came forward to help. The most surprising support came from Rachel's younger brother. He sent me a message saying he'd seen how his sister treated people in school, and now he was watching her and their dad try to paint me as the bad guy. He was too young to testify, but knowing he believed me meant a lot. My lawyer kept telling me we had a strong case, but I was still nervous. Rachel's father had a lot of money and influence in our town. Plus, my mother kept trying to make me look bad, telling anyone who would listen that I was just doing this for money and attention. The final hearing was set for a Tuesday morning. I barely slept the night before, but Katie made sure I ate breakfast and looked presentable. The courthouse was packed. Seems like half the town wanted to see how this would end. My mother's lawyer tried to paint me as an ungrateful daughter who was trying to punish her mother for finding happiness. But then my lawyer started bringing up evidence. He showed the social media posts where Rachel and her friends had mocked me. He had witnesses describe the bullying they'd seen. Then came the financial records showing how Rachel's father had been supporting my mother while I wore secondhand clothes and skipped school trips because we couldn't afford them. The turning point came when my lawyer presented evidence that my mother had actually helped cover up some of Rachel's bullying. There was an incident report from school that had mysteriously disappeared after my mother volunteered to file it. A teacher testified about how my mother had convinced her not to report Rachel for destroying my science project, saying I was just being sensitive. It took 3 more weeks for the judge to make a decision. Those were the longest 3 weeks of my life. I kept working remotely, trying to stay busy, but I checked my phone constantly for news from my lawyer. Finally, he called with the news: we'd won. The judge ordered my mother to pay me $50,000 in damages for emotional distress. It wasn't about the money, though. It was about finally having someone in authority say that what happened to me was wrong, and my mother should have protected me. After paying my lawyer and giving Katie some money for letting me stay with her, I still had enough left to start therapy, something I should have done years ago. My mother and Rachel's father posted angry messages online about how the legal system had failed them, but I didn't care anymore. Rachel blocked me on everything, which was fine by me. The day after the verdict, I booked my flight back home, my real home, the city where I'd built my life after college. Before leaving, I drove past my old high school one last time. The building still looked the same, but it didn't scare me anymore. I'd finally stood up to my bullies, all of them, including the one who should have been protecting me all along. Some people in town said I went too far, that you shouldn't sue your own mother. But they didn't live through what I did. They didn't spend years being terrorized at school while their mother dated the bully's father in secret. They didn't have to find out that their mother chose a man over their safety and happiness. I don't hate my mother anymore. That would take too much energy. I just don't want her in my life. She made her choice years ago when she decided her relationship was more important than protecting her child. Now I've made my choice too. Back in my apartment, looking at the city lights through my window, I finally feel at peace. My phone buzzes sometimes with messages from unknown numbers. Flying monkeys my mother sends to guilt me into talking to her again. I delete them without reading them. I have a good job, real friends, and a future that's completely my own. That's all I need. Some people say forgiveness is the key to moving on. Maybe they're right. But sometimes, justice feels better than forgiveness. And sometimes, the only way to heal is to walk away from the people who hurt you, even if they're family. Especially if they're family.